All right, everybody, welcome to this particular instruction week. We're going to be looking at how the ear works, and then specifically we're going to be looking at the inner ear, the vestibular apparatus, and as an extension, we're going to be looking at how this vestibular apparatus helps us distinguish the different types of pitch that we are hearing, so inflections of the voice and the high tones, the low tones, and how that all works. So we're going to begin by looking at a nice overview of how the ear works in general, and then we're going to go into that in a bit of detail. So I hope you enjoy the journey as we go through it. So nice image of the ear. I know it's a little bit out of focus, but again, we have our external ear, middle ear here, and then the inner ear, which is where we're going to make most of our focus. So quick review here. The sound vibrations that we're looking at here, those are coming from all kinds of various external stimuli. A tree falls, cars running, a person is speaking to you in a lecture in this manner. Those are all vibrations of air molecules, and those air molecules, of course, are vibrating in waves. Those waves then travel into the ear. So we're going into the ear, we're going to hit the tympanic membrane, and that's going to vibrate the tympanic membrane, which is then going to in turn vibrate the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. This is the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. This is, of course, is our eardrum. That as that moves back and forth, that is going to cause those waves to then propagate into this vestibular apparatus, which is then going to pass it on to the cochlea. The cochlea is then going to send this the message that it is receiving from the outside to the auditory nerve, and that auditory nerve is then going to go to the brain, and there it's going to be interpreted, and that's how we're hearing the sounds that you're hearing right now, like me talking to you. So let's look at the vestibular apparatus in a bit more detail, and we'll get into a bit more description on how exactly the cochlea and that vestibular apparatus is working and what it does for us. So first, let's look at these semicircular canals. You can see they have various names, and those semicircular canals are going to give us a sense of space, where we are in relation to all the other objects around us and where we are in our environment. They also give us a sense of pull of gravity on us, as well as helping us maintain our posture and so forth. So these semicircular canals are very important in giving us information to the auditory nerve and then to the brain to give us a sense of where we're at in the environment. Are we lying down? Are we standing up? Are we sitting? What is our relationship to our environment, and where exactly are we? There are also some recent studies that have been shown that this vestibular apparatus is connected to the motor control, cerebrum and cerebellum in the brain, and those in tandem work to help us either feel good about ourselves, or it can actually drive us to some anxiety, and we'll get back to that momentarily on the studies that have been done that way. Let's look at this cochlea again and journey on through there. So the cochlea, again, review real quickly. We're getting these air molecules coming into the eardrum, the tympanum, hitting the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and that in turn, as that movement propagates, we're going into the oval windows. So this the stapes is vibrating this piece and can actually amplify the sounds that we are hearing so that they're interpreted in a way that helps us hear exactly what's going on in the environment. So sending these waves throughout the cochlea, all right? Those waves are going to activate various cilia, and those cilia are traveling through the paralymph and the endolymph, different types of fluids which are able to respond differently to different types of waves. And the cilia are also sized very differently as well. So high, low, and medium, each one cilia is designed to pick up different types of sound and different pitches, and so depending on the wave that is coming through and the pitch that we're getting from the outside, that activates very specific cilia, which then vibrate through the fluid mentioned, and then they send that information on to the auditory nerves. So the auditory nerves then, of course, they're activated through these voltage-gated channels, which the cilia and this fluid then operates. The auditory nerves then are polarized in much the same way the eyes are. They're not, they don't activate in the same way that nerves, the regular nerves do. They have a sense of hyperpolarization as well, so that they can receive multiple stimuli very quickly. They pass that on to the various other nerves going to the brain to then interpret that. So again, depending on the sound that we're hearing, if it's very low, it's activating specific cilia, and then if it's higher, it's activating various cilia as well. Again, our window of being able to hear decreases as we age, and that changes the type of cilia that are activated and what they do. And of course, as with anything with age, these things can get worn out. So we'll go back to talking about the studies that have been done that connect emotion to these vestibular canals, this vestibular apparatus, and how this can actually be driving us to anxiety, depression, or the opposite. So we'll go back to that here just momentarily. So go back for a minute in this slide. So we're looking at these semicircular canals and the cochlea here. So there have been recent studies to show that the part of the brain involved with motor function and coordination also works with this part of the vestibular apparatus. So when people have deficiencies in motor control, they also tend to have some issue with their where they are in their environment, which then is interpreted through these semicircular canals. And as this interpretation goes, if they're not comfortable where they're at in their environment, which again, this is where that processing center happens, and then that's relayed to motor control within the brain, that can cause anxiety, and that all then influences the mood. Now, this does sound a little sketchy at times. Not sure how the science works on this, but they are showing information here. Now, looking at how this all comes together, we're looking at the brain and all of these things as a central processing unit. So the brain as this central processing unit can then affect all of these other systems. And what the scientists are suggesting is that we haven't really looked to see how all of these systems are interconnected. So the more that we look for some of these interconnected pieces of the brain and the accessory organs around it that help us interpret our environment, we can then start to look at and see how things like anxiety and depression can be affected from the brain, but not just from the brain, but how the rest of we're interpreting that environment within space, again looking back at these semicircular canals, and how that can then go into looking at because we're not comfortable in the environment. Let's say we have someone who has a certain an abnormal gait, a way of getting around, and that abnormal gait then they know how to get around in environments that they're very comfortable with. So as they are exposed to a new environment, they have to interpret that environment by sight and by by touch and by all the other senses that we have, these special senses. One of those senses being where they are at in space, where they are in relation to the floor, to gravity, and everything else. And that relation to the space around them can then relay a message to the rest of the brain that says, I am not comfortable in here, and therefore they would get anxiety. The same thing has been demonstrated for people who have a fear of heights called agoraphobia. And in that case, if they are not familiar with the space and they're not enjoying the space that they're in, then that is going to then send signals back to the brain, first again interpreted with this and other senses, to show you just how these areas are controlled and where the interrelation comes from. Find it very fascinating that we have this, and that these scientists have been able to make this make us aware of this. And again, I hope you have enjoyed this journey, and we'll catch you next time.